Hey everyone, how's it going? I am coming to you from a different camera, and I apologize for this. I was not being a good booktuber and didn't charge the batteries for my good camera, so I am recording on my phone today. So please excuse the drop in video quality and drop in audio quality, but this will just have to do for now, and I will be sure to not let, not lapse in judgment in the way that I have this weekend and allow my batteries to go uncharged. But anyway, this is my Sunday Miscellany video, which I do every week. This is for anyone who's new to the channel or to this feature on the channel. This is a weekly segment where I give a reading update in the tradition of Friday Reads, but I also talk about the music that I've listened to and the movies that I've watched. And I generally start out with the music, and so this week I listened to a bunch of Bach, I listened to a collection of his organ works, and I listened to 3 of his cello sonatas, as played by Martha Argerich, along with, obviously, a cellist. And Martha Argerich is my favorite pianist, actually. There are a lot of obviously great pianists who I like Glenn Gould and Vladimir Ashkenazy, but she is my favorite, and so she was on the piano for these cello sonatas, and that's what attracted me to listening to them, and they are magnificent. I love them. The organ works are not played by Martha Argerich, but I loved them too. I was actually attracted to the organ works of Bach for the first time because they're actually used a fair amount in the filmography of Andrei Tarkovsky. And yeah, so I have this synaptic link between Tarkovsky's films and Bach. And Tarkovsky did love Bach, but a lot of people reference Bach, so it's a bit peculiar that that synaptic link is like that in me, but nonetheless it is, and so I will include some tracks from the organ works of Bach and his cello sonatas in the playlist for this week. I leave a playlist of a Spotify playlist for every week of these Sunday Miscellany videos, so keep an eye out for that if you want to listen to what I'm talking about here. And then I'm also including one movement from Mozart's 8th Piano Sonata, which is an extremely touching movement, particularly, sort of solemn movement. But, with Mozart, whenever piece of music in Mozart is dark or sad or, sorrowful, there's always sort of a hint of consolation underneath it. And that's what I love about Mozart. And I think that this really came out in this piece. So that's in the playlist. And then completely changing tone, we move forward in time to Edgar Varese. I've talked a little bit about him before in these Sunday Miscellany videos, and I am including a piece by him called Equatorial, and this piece interested me because it's one of the first pieces of music ever written with a part for the theremin. And if you know the soundtrack from The Day the Earth Stood Still, I believe that soundtrack uses the theremin. So if you know that, that's sort of what the theremin sounds like. It's a very weird instrument. I don't really know how it works or know much about it, but it's pretty cool. I really like it, and so I'll leave this piece. But Varese's music is not for everyone. Some people would say that it's not even really music. It's more like he was just sort of arranging sounds in structures or whatever. But he did write. He wrote with tones. He wasn't just making sounds, but he wasn't atonal like Arnold Schoenberg so much as he was post-tonal or non-tonal, because even Schoenberg and Webern and these other atonal composers tended to write with a 12-tone method. Not all of them did. Some of them wrote in free atonality, but Varese didn't have any structure. None of the notes in his pieces relate to each other in any meaningful way. So anyway, his music is difficult for a lot of people to get into, but I will leave this piece. If you're interested in the theremin, maybe listen to it. It's a really peculiar piece. It also has a baritone in it. It's interesting. So anyway, next up is Ennio Morricone. I decided to listen to the great album of Yo-Yo Ma playing Ennio Morricone scores on the solo cello with an orchestra and a chorus. And yeah, I've made no secret of my love for Ennio Morricone. He's just such a great melodist, right? They just grab your heart and are so moving and wonderful. And yeah, and Yo-Yo Ma is a great cellist. So yeah, Ennio Morricone for me is I mean, depending on the day of the week, he might be my favorite soundtrack composer. He would face some stiff competition. I also love James Horner and Howard Shore and John Williams and Zbigniew Preisner, and Michael Nyman is someone who I've listened to some of his soundtracks and really liked. So he faces stiff competition, but he would at least be a top 3 composer. He might be my top on many days of the week. So anyway, that's Ennio Morricone. And then last, with the music, I have some jazz. I was inspired to listen to some more jazz this week because of Hard to Be a God, which I watched and talked about in my last Sunday Miscellany. And the reason that inspired me to listen to some more jazz is because there are some jazz pieces that actually appear at the beginning and the end of that movie. The main character has this instrument that he plays. I don't know if it's a real instrument or a fake or like a made-up instrument or what, or whether it's supposed to be like a saxophone or a trumpet or something. But anyway, he plays these pieces on this wind instrument of some sort, and they're lovely. I love them, and so they just inspired me to go find more. And so I listened to Sarah Vaughan's self-titled album, which has trumpet playing by Clifford Brown. Both Sarah Vaughan and Clifford Brown were magnificent. I think Sarah Vaughan has such a unique voice. I love her, and the trumpet playing was a plus as well. I actually just looked up Clifford Brown. Apparently he died when he was only 25. That's really unfortunate, but that seems to be the case with a lot of great jazz musicians, that they either died young or just lived very tumultuous lives. I don't quite know what it is with jazz musicians and that, but anyway. And then I listened to some albums by Sonny Rollins, saxophonist, and that was quite nice. So I'll leave some from that in the playlist. So anyway, that's the music. I will move on now to books, and I actually meant to finish 2 books, but only ended up finishing 1. And I'll start with that book. The book that I finished was The Tradition by Jericho Brown. This is a Pulitzer Prize-winning collection of poetry, and I think it's probably the best collection of poetry that I read this month, in terms of its just technical virtuosity, so to speak, in terms of the sort of aphoristic wisdom that I look for in poetry that I love. I thought that this had a lot of wisdom in it, and I wish that I could read to you some of my favorite quotes, but my favorite quotes from the book are saved on my phone, and I am recording on my phone, so I can't read them to you, unfortunately. But I thought that this was a great, challenging collection. Challenging in its themes, but challenging also formally sometimes. There were some poems that I didn't get quite as much as others, but I expect that from collections of poetry. I never really expect to love every poem in a collection of poetry. That I think it's just not possible, and I would say the same thing for a collection of short stories, a collection of essays, an anthology. You're never going to love everything the same way, no matter how good the author is. But yeah, Jericho Brown, definitely a poet I will look out for some more, but yeah, and I can recommend this, definitely. It's also, and I should add, though, that even though some of the poems were difficult for me, it's very accessible poetry, it's not experimental, really. It's quite traditional in a way, even though it's not written in form. It's written in free verse, but it is mostly pretty traditional, verse stanza poetry. There's no pages filled with random words splayed all around. So anyway, so that's Jericho Brown. The book that I thought that I was going to finish this week and ended up not able to finish was Assata by Assata Shakur. This is her autobiography, and I only have 70 pages left, so I'm quite far in, and I am really liking it. It is shaping up to be one of the best autobiographies that I've read in a long time. It's extremely powerful and extremely interesting to read on a lot of different levels, but I will go more in depth on it next week when I finish it. I will finish it by next week's Sunday Miscellany, because I literally only have 70 pages, so I will have it done by then. And so, yeah, but I'm really enjoying it, so hopefully I can talk about it more in depth. And then I also am gonna today finish up the Book of Acts in the New Testament, and and then I'll make a video on that. But not too much in the way of reading to talk about. Weirdly, I feel like, does anyone else who watch these Sunday Miscellanies, do you get the sense that the books are actually what I talk about the least? Like, I spend all this time talking about music, and then I spend a lot of time at the end talking about books, about movies, and I feel like the books actually get very little attention. It feels very, very odd, since this is, ostensibly a booktube channel. But anyway, I thought that since I don't have too much to talk about in the way of books that I finished, I would go through my March TBR. So I will be finishing Assata in March, very early in March, and but then there are a couple of different sort of events that I'm participating in and I need to attend to. So the first of those is one that I'm hosting along with Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse and Alex from Big Owl Books, and that's March of the Mammoths 2021, where we encourage everyone to read books that are 800 pages or longer. And the book that I have picked is Moby-Dick, and this is a lovely modern library edition. I absolutely love these editions, and this is also illustrated, and yeah, so that's great. And what I also really like about this edition is that the margins are huge, so you can see there that the margins are gigantic, and I love big margins. I like a lot of white space on the page. It just puts me at ease, makes me feel a little bit less intimidated by books, especially long books. But yeah, I think because the margins are so big on this book, it should be easy for me to get through it, despite the fact that it's Moby-Dick, and Moby-Dick isn't exactly known for being a walk in the park in terms of the ease with which people make their way through it. But this is a reread for me, and personally, I just cannot wait to return to the world of this novel. I just loved it. It was, funny. The prose is exquisite, and the characters are so interesting and so funny. So I cannot wait to return to it. And then another event that I'm participating in is March of the Moderns, which I will leave links to whoever's hosting it in the description. I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head, but a Book Text, whose name I'm blanking on as well, I'm so sorry, but Book Text, the channel Book Text, she is sort of helping to host it, I think. I don't know if she's an official host, but she made an announcement video for it. And so March of the Moderns is an event that obviously also takes place in March, because all the events are in March. Every single BookTube event is in March. There are no events any other month of the year. They're all in March for some reason. We all are obsessed with putting everything in the month of March. All of our birthdays are also in the month of March. And every holiday we have decided to put in the month of March. There will be Christmas on the 24th of March. We are putting everything in March, okay? We're putting the Sundance Film Festival in March too, okay? It's all going to be virtual, but it's all going to be there. Oh yeah, and the Oscars are in March. They're technically in April, but they're actually being moved to March. Everything is in March, okay? But anyway, rant aside, March of the Moderns is obviously in March, and it's about reading books that were published between 1900 and 1950, and I love that period in literature, and so I was really excited to see that there was an event. But because I have a lot of other things going on, I can only read one really small book, and what I'm reading is in this. This is my collected poetry and prose of Wallace Stevens in a Library of America slipcover edition, and I am going to read his 1942 volume, Parts of a World, and yeah, that'll be a pleasure. He's my favorite poet of all time, so this will be great. And I don't know, I always feel bad when I have a favorite author or a favorite book, and I end up feeling like I've sort of neglected them for a time, Do any of you feel like that sometimes, where you'll have a book that you call your favorite book, or an author who you call your favorite author, but then you realize that you haven't even touched their work in years, or you haven't reread that book you claim to be your favorite in years? Like, does anyone else have periods like that? But anyway, I just realized I haven't read that much Wallace Stevens recently, and he's my favorite poet, so I should be reading him. So anyway, I will be reading that, and then the last sort of event that I have to attend to is the BookTube Spin, which was arranged by Rick over at his channel, and that was where he sort of randomly chose books for us all to read, and the book that was chosen for me was Second Treatise of Government by John Locke. This volume also includes a letter concerning toleration, but I'm not going to read that, and because it's just it'll be thrilling enough just to read a letter, the second treatise, but it will be interesting to read it because it was such a big influence on the founding fathers of the United States, and also has had obviously influence elsewhere. But anyway, so I'll be reading that. It's very short, it's I think 112 pages, so it'll be easy to get through. And then the other books that and then a buddy read that I have this month is Regarding the Pain of Others by Susan Sontag, and this will actually be the third time that I'm reading this book. It is a brilliant, brilliant book. I cannot wait to revisit it. But I am going to be buddy reading it this time with Allie, who goes under the commenter name Foxed Folios. She doesn't have a channel, but you might know her through the comments. And she and I are going to be buddy reading this, and that'll be super interesting to buddy read it and interesting to revisit this book that I love so much. So anyway, and then I have some other books that I'm just reading for myself. And first off, I have 3 collections of poetry that I'll be reading. I'm trying to read 1 slim volume of poetry per week this year, I've decided. And so the 3 volumes of poetry I have are A Nail the Evening Hangs On by Monica Suk, who I believe is a Vietnamese-American poet. Then we have Whereas by Layli Long Soldier, who is a Lakota poet. And then IRL by Tommy Pico, who I know is also a Native American author, but I can't seem to remember which nation specifically he's from. But I will look that up before I review this book. But I read some of both Layli Long Soldier and Tommy Pico I read in the Anthology New Poets of Native Nations, which I read last year, and really, really liked their work, so I want to read more of it. And and then 2 books that I'll sort of be chipping away at are In Search of Our Mother's Gardens by Alice Walker, which I'm already about a quarter of the way through, and I figure I'll just squeeze an essay in here and there where I can. I probably won't even finish it in March, but I'm really enjoying it. She writes a lot about Zora Neale Hurston in this book, and she's really making me want to read Zora Neale Hurston, which is always wonderful when one author leads you to another author, you know. But there are a lot of book recommendations in this essay collection. But yeah, and a lot of just interesting essays. I can sort of see just how influential this collection has been because she expresses a lot of ideas that I think have become much more mainstream now. But you know, I think she was sort of articulating them for the first time in this book. So it's a really interesting read. And I'll also be chipping away at the Oxford Anthology of African American Poetry, which I've actually been chipping away at for the past several months. I just haven't talked about it that much because, you know, it's not that interesting for me to, you know, come onto a Sunday Miscellany and say, oh, yeah, I read another 2 poems in this gigantic collection. But anyway, so I'll be chipping away at that. And then the last thing that I have is another library book, and it's a big book. So this is Leonardo da Vinci, The Complete Paintings by Frank Zollner. And yeah, so I read The Story of Art by E.H. Gombrich last month, and of all of the artists that he discusses in that book, Leonardo da Vinci was the one I was left most interested to learn more about. And so this is a gigantic book that's just filled with illustrations and essays by Frank Zollner about Leonardo's life and work. So that should be interesting. And, I mean, a short read, it's not very long, and as you can imagine, a lot of this is just paintings. So, yeah, hopefully when I review it, I can sort of, do a different camera angle where I can show you the illustrations in here. But, yeah, we will get to that. But anyway, so that's my March TBR. I got my coffee, just gonna take a sip. Oh, the coffee got cold. But this is my one of my many cow mugs. My maternal grandmother, when I was very young, gave me a cow mug. Not this one, but a different one. And then from then on, she just started this tradition of giving me cow-themed things. And so I have like 3 or 4 cow mugs. I have glasses with cows on them. I have this cup holder with a cow on it. So I have a lot of cow things. And cows are actually one of my favorite animals. But anyway. So yeah, that's my TBR, so let me know what you think of any of this, but I will move on now to the movies, and I have 6 movies to talk about. 2 of them were rewatches, and that is always a pleasure to revisit a movie, and so I'll talk first about the 2 rewatches. So the first one of those that I rewatched was AI Artificial Intelligence, which was directed by Steven Spielberg, and this is a movie I have a funny history with, because I watched it years and years ago with my mom. I can't even really remember when we watched it, but we both loved it so much. And what was weird was that I often heard AI Artificial Intelligence kind of derided by people as this huge flop in Spielberg's career, you know, as just, you know, one of his worst movies, so on and so forth. And that I always felt kind of alone, as as a lover of this movie. But then last year, I think I came across a list by the BBC that was a list of the best movies of the 21st century so far, and AI, artificial intelligence, was on the list. And I felt so validated. I was so excited. But I also hadn't seen the movie in a long time, so I thought, well, this is a perfect prompt for me to rewatch it, but I hadn't been able to find it anywhere. But finally, I rewatched it, and yeah, I loved it just as much. I think it does what the best science fiction needs to do, I think, which is that, it has this veneer of being about, robots or artificial intelligence or spaceships or whatever, or like aliens or something. But what good science fiction really needs to do, I think, to be timeless, is it needs to, at its heart, just be about being human. And I think that artificial intelligence stories can do that in a way that a lot of other stories can't. And so I think they're fascinating for that reason, and this is no exception. And what I think I love most about this movie is, for one thing, the main performance by I forget that child actor's name, but I'll try to write it down there. But his performance is so good. It's a bit of a shame that he hasn't necessarily gone on to all that much success as an adult, but that's okay. But his performance is magnificent. But what I think I love most about it is that it's just about mother-son relationships, and I think that might be why my mom and I loved it. We've always been extremely close, and so I think that this movie just touched us because it's about mother-son relationships. The main character is this robot who's in the form of a child who just wants, this woman who has sort of taken him in to love him like a son, and she struggles with that, and she has her own sort of quote-unquote real son who she also loves, and that's sort of the big struggle. And so it's a lot about mother-son relationships, and I think it's really good on that subject. And also, I noticed this time around that it's just exquisitely shot. It's a beautiful movie. So yeah, that a great hit for me. And then the second one is also another movie that I would rank as one of my favorite movies ever. It is Ida, directed by Paweł Pawlikowski, who is a Polish director, as you can probably tell by the name. But Ida is about it takes place in, I think, the 1950s, and it's about a young woman who is about, so it takes place in communist Poland, and the main character is a young woman who's about to take her vows as a nun, but the abbess tells her that before she can take her vows, she needs to meet her one living relative, who is her aunt. And so she does. She goes to visit her aunt, and her aunt is a fascinating character. She's a judge in this communist country, and so she's sort of complicit with a lot of the atrocities of the communist government in a way. But she's very humanized. She's not demonized. She's a very human, very interesting, multi-layered character. But anyway, so the woman goes to meet her aunt, and her aunt reveals to her that she's Jewish, and that in fact her parents were killed in the Holocaust. And so, and obviously the aunt is Ida. So the main character's name is revealed to be Ida. That's her given name at birth. That's not her name in the movie. But they decide to go on this quest to find where her parents are buried, because obviously, like, Jews who were killed in the Holocaust didn't get like proper graves. They were just sort of tossed anywhere, and so they tried to go find their remains and give them a proper burial to get some closure. And it just explores the relationship between these two women and the characters of these two women. It really is a dual character study of the two of them, and I think as that, it is fascinating, because I think the film asks a lot of interesting questions about, purity versus dirtiness, moral dirtiness. Because, you have this nun, or almost nun, who is, ostensibly this pure person, right? At least in the eyes of quote-unquote God. And then you have this woman who's a judge who you can probably assume has done some bad things in her life as a judge, is complicit with this communist government, but then she also is very humanized. And Ida, at the beginning, does not seem very human. She seems extremely flat and stiff and difficult. But then she also sort of gets more human over the course of the film. And as she gets more human, she seems to start to question her desire to become a nun, and seems to start to want to be in the world, to live a real life, so to speak. A little bit like her aunt, but obviously not entirely, since her aunt is, doing some bad things, is also, struggles with alcohol abuse, and sort of doesn't have, I don't know. It doesn't have a proper relationship with anyone. It seems, she at several points has one night stands with men, and so it just seems that she's sort of wandering through life. But yeah, it's just such an interesting movie. I think it's also sort of about, yeah, it's really really good, really beautifully shot. I think Pavel Pawlikowski has a way with capturing open space, and I don't mean like open spaces outdoors, although he does capture open spaces outdoors beautifully. But that's not quite what I mean. I just mean that in a lot of the frames in his film, the people in the frame will be sort of in the corner here, and then there will be all this open space, and I think that he does that so well, and I would love to look at what he's doing with that, why he does that. It's sort of like this sort of emphasis on the vastness of the people's surroundings, both natural surroundings and artificial surroundings. I think is a big part of his movies, but yeah, it's a magnificent movie, probably one of my favorite of the 21st century. In one of those lists of the best movies of the 21st century, I would include it along with AI, artificial intelligence, and along with one other movie I'm going to talk about, and I'll go ahead and talk about that movie, which is Mudbound, directed by Dee Rees. This is a 2017 film. It's about two men, one of whom is white, one of whom was black, who fought in World War II and have returned to their home in Mississippi in the Jim Crow South. And so you can imagine they have very different homecomings. The black man in particular obviously faces a lot, sort of comes home to a rude awakening. When he was fighting in Europe, he was a hero, right? And he talks about how people in Europe are supposedly not prejudiced against black people. I always take issue when people talk about Europeans as though they're not prejudiced in the way that Americans are, because for one thing, I mean, it may be that black people go to Europe and aren't treated as poorly as they are in the U.S., but I mean, just look at the history of anti-Semitism in Europe, or look at the way that Europe is reacting to the migrants from the Middle East right now, uh, and I think that puts to rest any idea that Europeans are somehow free of racism. But the fact of the matter is that black people, particularly black soldiers who fought in World War II, were treated much better in Europe than they were in their home. So I think that's fair. But anyway, so the black soldier comes home to this rude awakening, right? And the white man in particular suffers a lot from PTSD. And so it's a lot about sort of mental health, obviously about racism. It's also about sexism and gender roles, which are all woven in extremely subtly. It's also about masculinity and femininity. I think masculinity in particular is extremely interesting in this movie, because the man who struggles with PTSD is sort of looked down upon for his struggles and for his alcoholism, which sort of is born of his struggle with PTSD, because he's seen as like not being a man. You know what I mean? In particular by his own father, who comes out as the main antagonist of the movie. The father not only buys into this idea of toxic masculinity, but he is also a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And and so a lot of these themes are jam-packed in and are woven in so well. Sometimes when directors or writers deal with social issues in their work, you could get the sense that they sort of had a checklist of issues that they needed to needed to have in their movie, and you can just see them behind the screen going check mark, but I did not get that sense from this movie. They were all woven in extremely well. So a great movie, beautifully shot too. Rachel Morrison, who was the cinematographer on this movie, was actually the first woman to be nominated for an Oscar for cinematography, and the fact that took until 2017 to happen should be a source of shame for everyone. And I'm a little bit sad that she didn't win, because it is just such a beautiful film. Very kind of Terrence Malick-like cinematography, this sort of a lot of happy hour shooting, a lot of contrast between sort of an idyllic farm setting and like mud and dirt, mud of the title, and other things. So a lovely film, really hard film. I mean, it's heavy, it's difficult, but it's excellent. And then, another movie, a new release that I watched was Nomadland, directed by Chloe Zhao. So this is kind of the It movie. It probably doesn't need too much of an introduction at this point. But this stars Frances McDormand as a middle-aged woman who is living as a nomad. So she's basically just living in a van, going from place to place, finding work where she can. and yeah, it's just about her journey. It's the people she meets, her interactions to a degree with her family, who kind of can't quite understand why she's doing this. Because she did it by choice to a certain degree. It's not entirely that she was forced into it by economic insecurity or something, although that did play a part. But people ask her why she's doing this, and it explores why she wants to do it. She says that she likes work, she loves work, and so she doesn't want to retire. But also she likes the sort of transient life that she gets to live on the road. It's a little bit of a Grapes of Wrath feel to it, Also a little bit of a housekeeping feel, housekeeping by Marilyn Robinson feel to it. I think one of the characters in that movie is a transient, as it's called, and it's a really lovely piece of work, I think. A lot of themes woven in really well, really beautifully shot. Very Terrence Malick. Chloe Zhao, the director, has made no secret of her love for Terrence Malick, and you can see his inspiration there. But lovely shots of the American West in particular, and a great lead performance by Frances McDormand. So I recommend this movie, definitely. And then, so last two movies. One is a very old movie, so Fort Apache, directed by John Ford. This is, I think, my last John Ford I'm going to watch for a while, because I just think I maybe am getting a little bit overdosed on John Ford. Sometimes when I really want to immerse myself in the work of someone, I will sort of overdo it, and so I think I maybe watched too much John Ford. I maybe shouldn't have watched this one. I maybe should have waited, but I did enjoy it. I think it was a solid 8 out of 10 for me. Beautifully shot as anything by John Ford. In Monument Valley. It's one of the first sort of pro-Native American westerns, and yeah, where Native Americans weren't portrayed as villains or as savages. They were portrayed sort of respectfully, and I think that idea is somewhat undercut by the fact that there are no actual Native American characters who are really fleshed out in the movie. But the movie is much more favorable towards Native Americans than probably most westerns that came before it, because there's one character who thinks that Native Americans are savages, brutes, uncivilized, so on and so forth, and there's another character who is played by John Wayne, who tells that character, no, they need to be treated with respect. They're civilized people. They just need to be treated well. They've been treated poorly by whites, so you can't blame them for wanting to rebel and this sort of thing. And so there is that, but there aren't really any fleshed out Native American characters. So I don't know. I don't know entirely whether I buy the characterization of it as a pro Native American Western, but anyway. And then the last movie is Eyes Wide Shut, directed by Stanley Kubrick, his last film. Kind of appropriate that I watched a Kubrick movie just before AI Artificial Intelligence, because AI Artificial Intelligence, as I understand it, was a Kubrick project for a time, and he just sort of couldn't figure out how to do it, couldn't get it off the ground, so he handed it off to Steven Spielberg, and obviously I'm glad he did, because I think Spielberg made a great movie out of it. But Eyes Wide Shut is a really interesting movie. I think it's one of those movies that's just enigmatic. I feel like a lot of great directors at some point in their career, they may have directed a lot of great films, but then they'll direct this one movie that is just enigmatic, that's just a tough nut to crack for most people. Like Tarkovsky with Mirror, you have Kieslowski with The Double Life of Veronique, and I think that Eyes Wide Shut might be Kubrick's Mirror, just not in the sense that it's all that similar to Mirror, but in the sense that it's just enigmatic, a bit difficult to pin down. I don't quite know what to say about it, other than that it is exquisite, as exquisite, with as exquisite set pieces as anything in Kubrick's body of work. And yeah, he also makes really evocative use of music. I think there's one point where a hymn is played backwards in this sort of ritual that this cult is doing in this mansion, and that's also probably my favorite sequence in the movie, because I think it's just a beautifully choreographed sequence where the music is just about perfectly set to what's going on. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what this movie is about, but I know I will rewatch it because I think it's just fascinating. So yeah, I do love Eyes Wide Shut. It's probably the movie here that I'm most eager to like discuss, just cause I can't quite crack it open or figure out what's going on in it. So if you've watched Eyes Wide Shut, then let's have a chat in the comments. But anyway, so those are all the movies, and that's everything I have to talk about. So anyway, I will leave timestamps for everyone if you want to skip around to what you most want to watch. But anyway, I will leave things at that, and I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope you all have a good weekend, or good week, sorry. And I will sign off and talk to you all later.